So you live in Poland?
Yes, I do, in Warsaw.
Okay.
Okay, are we ready?
But I'll tell you all about
Start on
it.
time and have a laugh.
Have you ever heard of Brezhnev?
Excuse me?
Brezhnev? Have you heard of Brezhnev?
Is it a town?
Yes, a small town in eastern Poland.
Then I probably heard of it.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I assume that a few people will arrive as well. And as was being mentioned by Jean, we're in this room because we have so much going on tonight. By the way, I'm Rabbi Dan Moskowitz from Temple Shalom. There's an introduction to Judaism class going on in the next room, and they're learning Hebrew right now, so you might hear a little bit of that. There's a genealogy course going on in the other room. Anything in the social hall tonight? No, I don't think so.
Just some kids playing.
Some kids playing in the social hall.
You want to play Lego.
Okay, there's Lego in the social hall. But what's happening here is really something very, very special, and we're very fortunate. Temple Shalom has been blessed to have this sort of informal partnership with a wonderful program, Encountering Auschwitz, out of UBC with their director, Bojana. Bojana, help me with your last name?
Karwowska.
Bojana. And her husband Marek is here as well. And we've, that was a partnership that was created really through Bill and Risa Levine. Bill and Risa are supporters of that program, and it was through them that we first had our first encounter, I think 3 lectures ago?
Yeah.
Right, with Anya, yes?
I think it
Anya
was
Switzer, I think was our
Professor
first.
Spiewak.
No, it was Anya Switzer before that, and then Professor Spivak. And we enjoy it, Sharon and I, because we get to have them over for dinner Saturday night beforehand. So I was able to enjoy our evening together. I want to introduce Bojana so she can explain this unique program and introduce our speaker. I have to teach at 8 o'clock in the room next door, but we are recording this evening. And so I will pop in and out, but we did have a chance to share a bit Saturday night at my home. And I thank you so much for being here tonight. Bojana, please.
Maybe I'll do it from here. Probably singing in a way. My name is Bożena Karwowska. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Central, Eastern, Northern European Studies. And I've been directing a program or a seminar abroad. It's called Witnessing Auschwitz. There were 4 groups of students who already were in Poland. This May 2019, there will be the 5th group. In addition to the part that is done together with Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, there is an introductory and then concluding part done together with the Jewish Historical Institute, because we want to educate students about the Jewish life before 1939 and then what happened after the liberation. And Alicja is a star of the program. All students, regardless how many years ago they took a tour on Okopowa Street Cemetery, they remember it. Because Alicja works in the Jewish Historical Institute in the Department of the Preservation of Jewish Heritage, and she deals especially with the burial places and with the cemeteries. She'll tell you much more than I can, so this is Alicja Mroczkowska from Jewish Historical Institute.
Thank you for such a kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here. It's my first time in Canada, so I thought that I would begin by telling you exactly who I am and what I do and why is it that I actually lecture on such a topic, because it is important and it does come to kind of a concluding whole. I started dealing with Jewish cemeteries when I was doing my master's thesis in anthropology of culture. And the idea for my research was to see how material heritage in Poland and how Jewish cemeteries in Poland and finding a tombstone of one's relative, how does it influence one identity in a community where people are just starting to find out that they have Jewish roots, that they are Jewish, half Jewish, part Jewish, whatever you call it, and they're trying to rebuild a community. And how does this work together? Also, how does it work when we are trying to recreate and reinvent a tradition which is also connected to burials, the very important moment in a family's life, a very important moment for someone who knows that this is going to happen. How do they want the burial even to look? And these conversations do take place. So while researching this, a whole spectrum of topics opened up for me. Also, for example, there is a burial society that there is a great cooperation between different sides, the Jewish people and the Polish people. And this is what I did. I went to the Jewish community in Warsaw and I talked to everyone there to tell them for them to tell them my story. And from then on, finishing the master's in anthropology, I did manage to get a job doing inventory of the largest Jewish cemetery in Poland, one of the largest in Europe as well, and this is the cemetery that was mentioned, the Okopowa Jewish Cemetery, and I have actually worked there for 4.5 years, like Monday to Friday, every single day, doing the inventory of the whole cemetery, which is 33 hectares, so that we could create an online database for everyone who is interested in their roots to be able to find the graves of their ancestors. So you would have the location, the transcription of the inscription in Yiddish or in Hebrew, and the photograph. And working there day by day, I started to see that there is a little more to this than, I would say, just tombstones and a cemetery, because there are people coming in and they are interacting and they are trying to preserve these places, and they don't know how to do it. And then there are families coming in from Israel, the United States, they're asking questions. I started to observe, well, even their behavior when they find the tombstones of their relatives in the cemetery. And I thought that this is really interesting, like what can be done. The cemetery, just so you know, it was like, it looks like a forest, a bush, it's falling apart. It was very difficult conditions to work in. And I thought maybe this is something very interesting to research. On the other hand, we were financed by a man from the United States, Emil Karafio, who is an American Jew wanting to find his roots. And he came to Poland, to Warsaw, and no documents, no nothing. So this is why he financed it. There were some problems with bureaucratic problems. So all of a sudden the Jewish community in Warsaw steps in and they are helping us. We finished this project and we thought, wait a minute. We've been doing this for 4.5 years. I don't know if you can imagine, but where am I going to get a job, inventorying Jewish cemeteries? So we thought, let's take all of this experience that we have and make it into something bigger, and we created a foundation for documentation of Jewish cemeteries. And we decided to go into Poland because there is so much out there. And going into Poland, where to get the funds. And all of a sudden it turned out that there is this scholarship program from the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage, and they paid for us doing the inventory of next 40 cemeteries. And all of this, like going into the field and looking at even local people from Poland in different towns, and us as researchers coming in, doing this, how people are interacting. And I thought that it might be interesting to, yes, do a doctorate. At the same time, I did get a job in the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, and this was 6 years ago. So mine being a cultural anthropologist means that I research current things that are going on, and I just choose the topic. So I definitely chose Jewish heritage, and specifically Jewish cemeteries and how they are protected in Poland. And while working in the Jewish Historical Institute, I was kind of researching my own work to see how this can be applied. And this is important because, you see, I had this kind of an idealistic idea that I will write a first doctoral thesis which will maybe show people how to do this and how to solve these problems and how to correctly protect the Jewish cemeteries in Poland, which is a big problem. But what is exactly this work that I do, and what is it that we do in the Department for Documentation of Jewish Heritage? Well, first of all, this department is located in the Jewish Historical Institute, and our institute is the only institute which has a pre-war continuation in Poland of an institution, a research institution from before the war. And we actually survived the communist years, and we managed to do some research during that time. And at the beginning of the democracy times in the 1990s, a new field of studies, so exactly heritage preservation, was added onto this institute. And this institute, it is a state institution. It is financed by the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage, and it always was. But on the other hand, as you see, it's a Jewish historical institute, so we do have something of being that only Jewish organization and institution in Poland. So we do take it upon ourselves in our work to really make it count. My department holds about 70,000 photographs, which I'm also in charge of conservating and doing the inventory and organizing. And these photographs are in many cases exactly photographs of the material heritage in Poland. So this will be synagogues and cemeteries and any Jewish buildings which have survived. This will be actions of people. And this will not only be photographs, because we thought the photograph is just a photograph. How about we add a whole archive which will show us what has been happening in those towns with local people, with Jewish people, how they interact. We collect the correspondence and we have it all. But this collecting of the correspondence and collecting of this information led us to another stage. And this is the last 30 years. This is working with everyone, anyone interested in Jewish heritage, in doing anything. So this will be in every town in Poland. You will find a person or two or three who want to do something, who really want to protect or commemorate Jewish heritage. So we are collecting data about them. But as I mentioned, we are the Jewish institution, and it's not exactly in our official, I would say, statement that we have to do this, but it has been a tradition initiated by persons who established my department, that no matter what, we will be standing on the guard of halacha, so the Jewish law. And we will be standing on the guard of this because we have the authority as a state institution to maybe get in a little bit closer to some situations. But on the other hand, we feel that it is just simply right to do this because, well, if not us, then who will? So it has been a tradition in all of the work, especially work regarding Jewish cemeteries, to work with Jewish institutions. And this has been the Jewish communities or non-governmental organizations or chief rabbis who have been changing throughout the last 30 years, to work with them, doing an inventory of cemeteries, in supporting them when they are fighting to protect the bodies of the deceased. And when I started working there, in my generation, it turned out that there is an organization whom I've already been working with pretty closely, and this is the Rabbinical Commission for Cemeteries in Poland. And this Rabbinical Commission, it stands on the guard, and I will emphasize here, the Orthodox Judaism. So it is under our chief rabbi of Poland, who also represents an Orthodox way of viewing things, Michael Szudrich. He is the boss, and he has people who have been taught, who are teaching themselves exactly how to protect Jewish cemeteries in Poland. But why Jewish cemeteries? Why, with all this work that I am talking about, the photographs, all the other heritage, why such an emphasis on the Jewish cemeteries? Well, there is a great difference between the way that the Jewish law and the Polish law treats cemeteries. And the main difference is that the Polish law says that if a cemetery, any cemetery, not just Jewish, but any cemetery in Poland, it's not used for burial or not taken care of for a number of years, and this is 40, then it can be destroyed. Something can be built on it, the bodies can be exhumated, and this is great contradiction to what the Jewish law says, because it says, and I emphasize the Orthodox Jewish law says this, that the bodies can never be moved, that the cemetery remains one for eternity. And of course in Judaism we do have exceptions when bodies can be exhumated, taken out of the ground and moved, for example, to Jewish cemeteries or to Jerusalem and so on. But the chief rabbi of Poland for many years has made like this kind of a legal situation that in Poland it's impossible. And it's impossible because if we create a precedence of moving a body out of Polish landscape, then everyone will want to do it. And if everyone will want to do it, well, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to care for the bodies? Who's going to stand on the guard if every single piece of the remains has been moved? There won't be that many people, so we are sticking to the story that it cannot be moved no matter what. So this is a very, very great difference in this treatment. And the other thing is the condition of the Jewish cemeteries in Poland. And just to explain the situation, because it is very, very important here. The Jewish cemeteries were destroyed by the German army during the Second World War. They were destroyed in many ways. For example, the tombstones have been taken out. The job was done either by the German soldiers or by the Jews or by the Poles, and roads were paved or bridges were built, as you can see here. Usually it was done mainly to humiliate the Jews, and also because the road infrastructure in Poland was horrible. So the macewa, being a very good material, a flat stone, was ideal for this. So the Germans did the destruction in places where it was necessary, but this is not all. The Polish population also participated in this because there was absolutely no penalty. So there was no penalty for taking a tombstone and using it for something. Also, the Jewish cemeteries were one of the sites where executions happened, and we definitely, in almost all of the Jewish cemeteries, we will find war graves from that time. So there were places that were again destroyed by next burials, and a very disgraceful chapter in local Polish history is the digging for gold practices, as there was a stereotype that definitely Jewish people, when they went into hiding or during the war, they hid gold on themselves, in themselves. So this is also this part of the chapter and of the graves being dug through. After the Second World War, we do have, simplifying it greatly, but we do have the communist regime for the next 40 years. And during this time, of course, most of the property, any property that is in Poland, it goes under, it goes into the ownership of the Polish state. And if it goes into the ownership of the Polish state, then anything can happen to it. So this is the time that Jewish cemeteries are divided into individual parcels. Like one cemetery, it can be 3 or 4 plots of land divided into different parcels where a part has been built on, a part has been destroyed. Just to show you a few more photographs here. For example, also the Polish population, and this is whether it was just the fact that there are no Jews there anymore to take care of the cemeteries, whether it was anything anti-Semitic, I would say mainly also poverty and just disrespect, but they also use Jewish tombstones for their own construction purposes. And this will be, as you see, building houses, building steps, this will be even laboratories, barns, anything, practically any use of a tombstone you can imagine, we will find an example in Poland. This went along hand with a new law which was introduced in Poland in the 1950s and 1960s very gradually. This new law said that when you do not use a cemetery for a number of years, anything can be done to it. This is the time when we have parks and roads and preschools and playgrounds and sports fields and building sites. All of this will happen on cemeteries. So the tombstones will be again taken out, or the people will plan to take out the tombstones. And these cemeteries will be turned into, as you can see here, like there is a park when people actually walk their dogs, or just an apartment building standing there. So the cemeteries fall into really horrible conditions. Whatever is left out there, it's still being destroyed. I would say that there will be about 60% of cemeteries in Poland which do not have standing tombstones. This is what it's starting to look like, that you cannot recognize a Jewish cemetery from the rest of the landscape. It can be a forest, the remains of the stones, it should be filled with tombstones, and these cemeteries are definitely not. Another thing that happened was that cemeteries before the war were usually established in rather worse soil than the rest of the town or the city, and also on soil that was not good for farming. So this would be sand. And here you can see a cemetery very close to Warsaw, where what we are doing is we are collecting the remains of bones. You can also see there being trash, and what we do is we try to collect the remains and then give them a reburial in a area in the cemetery. This of course lasts for a short number of years, because sand moves and ways of protecting them are very difficult. But these cemeteries look this way because also when this legislation came out in the 1950s and 1960s, there was no penalty for destroying Jewish cemeteries. And if there was no penalty, then as you know, sand is very, very good material for construction as well. So many people went into the cemeteries and just took the sand with, of course, as you can see, the remains of bodies from that for construction purposes, which makes it quite tragic. So the cemeteries, this is what they look like. You cannot tell them apart practically from the rest of the landscape. Few tombstones are standing. The destruction is very great, and you can see, for example, in the photo, this photograph, that it's not even people doing any destruction, it's just that there is such neglect that the tombstones just sink into their natural environment. This photo here is my colleagues. We are trying to read the inscriptions, and we pick up the tombstones. So practically any kind of destruction that you can imagine does happen, as well as vandalism. You can see a tombstone here. I will just go back with the slides. Sorry. This is the same cemetery. We inventoried it in 2011, and the tombstones, the last 6 tombstones in that cemetery were still standing. And a few years later, a drunken man goes through the cemetery at night and just crashes this into small bits. So we cannot do anything about it. So having faced all this and knowing all this, that this is the situation where we have in Poland circa 1,200 Jewish cemeteries which have been built on, which have been desecrated in the ground, which practically cannot be found. We as a team, for the last 30 years also, but for me it's the last 10 years, we have been working on a methodology how to save them. And this is why such a great emphasis on our cooperation. Because I, as a, let's say, researcher and a representative of a state Jewish institution, maybe I can come up with a solution. I've been studying this and learning this, so I do have some knowledge, and so do the people from the Rabbinical Commission. But I think that we reached a point at some moment that really, when looking at all of this devastation, if you would ask us how to deal with tombstones which are returned back from construction sites, I would have an answer. If you would ask me how to preserve a land that is just sand, I would know how to get Israeli specialists who cover this land with special nets, for example. But all in all, it did seem to us that if you just ask me one more time how to do it, I will just say, I really don't know, because next and next and next things keep popping up, and next ways of destroying the cemeteries are being presented to us. And so we started looking back and what was done in the past, like how did the previous researchers, still active by the way, what did they do? And more and more publications are being written in Poland about this. And for example, when I told you about the legislation in the 1950s and the 1960s, actually the Jewish community, there was a Jewish community there. It was divided into secular and religious. And you have documents and correspondence of them writing to the Polish authorities and saying, can't something be done? In each particular case, if they could, they wrote and they tried to stop this. Also, in the 1970s, for example, first delegations come to Poland because there is finally an international exchange, and first Jewish Congress representatives come to Poland, and they try to talk to Polish state, then communist authorities. Can't something be done? Because we all know that there are so many cemeteries, we all know they are in tragic condition, and this is like sort of more than talking about just material heritage. This is more than a synagogue, this is more than a mikvah or any other building. These are human remains, and taking into consideration the Holocaust that happened, when we have people really dying in death camps and having no graves, that every single grave to us becomes a story, a separate story, and something that is that much of a value when it comes to, I would even say, Jewish presence in Poland, because these graves are still located there. So it is important. Then we started to look, okay, but how did they do it before, and why are we in a situation that, for example, a landmark preservation officer is calling me and saying, hello, we met in the field, I asked you, you're the nice Miss Alicja. Listen, we have this idea, we want to preserve Jewish cemeteries because the Landmark Preservation Office is responsible for protection of landmarks, and some cemeteries are registered as Polish landmarks. So I say, okay, I can tell you what's important, what's what, but they tell me, yes, we have this amazing plan, you know what, we want to go and inspect 6 cemeteries a year. I say, but you have 130 cemeteries in your region, so that's gonna take 30 years? Oh, I won't be working then. It's like, it's not a joke. They're of course not treating it as a joke, but what can they do? They have all the other landmarks in Poland that need to be taken care of. So we do discover, of course, that in the 1990s there are many meetings with these offices, with the landmark preservation offices, that there is some cooperation, that there is actually great influence from the American jury, for example, when it comes to negotiating preservation of Jewish cemeteries in Poland. And we do have documents of people meeting in embassies, in ministries, and working on a solution. So they actually did come up with a very good legal solution in the 1990s, and 97 is the year when there is this legislation act about the official approach of the Polish state towards the Jewish communities. And this document says that the Jewish communities can apply to get back their property from that was there in 1939. So this is any building or any plot of land which belonged to official Jewish community congregations, right? And of course, because of the very special status of Jewish cemeteries, Jewish communities in Poland are sort of obliged morally to apply for this kind of restitution. So they do, I think, write a couple of thousand documents to get these sites back, but the procedure, the bureaucratic procedure, takes forever. Also, there are hardly any documents, everything has been destroyed, stating that this belonged to a Jewish community. We cannot go into the ground in any way because of the Orthodox law, so we can only use georadar or historical maps to actually confirm whether there was a cemetery in a certain spot or not. And we do seem to look at this and, okay, so even the Jewish communities getting back the cemeteries, it's not helping. And if they're getting back these sites, then they're only getting a little symbolic plots of land which have not yet been used for everything I told you about, roads or buildings and so on. So we have a bit of a strange situation that all of a sudden we don't have Jewish cemeteries, we just have sort of symbolic terrains of Jewish cemeteries, and the rest is completely forgotten. So again, what do we do in a situation like this? And more and more of these cases were piling up. I think it was like 2014, 2015, and I, doing my research, I went to the Rabbinical Commission and I talked to them often, and I was also helping them to solve these problems. And they're telling me, listen, this week we have to go to like Eastern Poland. Everyone knows it's a cemetery there, but they're building this new telecommunication tower right in the middle of the cemetery. And the next week it's like, no, now we're going to another town because they just dug up like 20 skulls, but they continue with the roadworks. So we're sitting there and we're thinking, what can be done? What kind of a solution? And this is when one of the ladies working there said, we're like an ambulance for cemeteries. We only go when something bad happens because we have to protect the human remains. We cannot even go, for example, to cases such as someone finding tombstones, and what can be done with this? How can we make a commemoration? How can a monument be erected in a right way? Because so many bad things are happening with the human remains and we have to be there. So she said, we can't work like this. We have to come up with a solution that we go from intervention to direct prevention in such cases. So they came up with an idea that if it was possible to push through a legislation act in 97, it wasn't perfect, but it did happen. So maybe we can actually come up with a legislation act that we could, this was idealistic, to add to the constitution, which is hardly, is even endangered right now in Poland because of what is happening in our country. But we will create a new bill just for Jewish cemeteries, because we all know they're there. We know the number. We know they're in bad condition. Let's do something about it. And we started the negotiations, and I have to be honest with you, they did not go very well. It was like a month after month after month after month went on, and new things keep popping up. So again, you can come up with anything bad that can happen with a Jewish cemetery. It happened until one time when a big change happened, and what happened was a great, big, fabulous scandal. And this scandal happened in the little town of Płońsk, where a cemetery looks something like this, a very little area. The cemetery there has been established in the 16th century, so very old. It was destroyed during the Second World War by the Germans. It was very big, like at least 3 hectares. And the Germans took out all the tombstones and used them for roads. But then after the war, this cemetery is also special because it was one of the few cemeteries in Poland where burials happened. This means we still had a Jewish community there up to some point. And because of the legislation I told you about from the 60s, this cemetery was closed in 1961. And this is when the worst began to happen, because gradually over the next 30 years, there was a road built there, there was like this car sort of checking station built there, a gas station, a shopping center, a parking lot, and out of all of this, just a little area remained, and this area remained also thanks to the local community. Because the whole cemetery has been dug through back and forth, even through this symbolic area. But at the beginning of the 1980s, the local community, like I told you, there is always 1 or 2 or 3 persons which will want to do something. And there was a group of people then who said, okay, but this is like kind of important, and we all know that a Jewish cemetery is there. So they, as you see, this grand monument, the local community, they paid for it. There is like a Polish lady who designed it. The local, the locals also did it, and it's like it was very huge, standing above the whole of the cemetery. Gradually, also these tombstones that you see here, they're actually, we don't know what cemetery they come from, but they've been used as sort of additional memorials, giving additional information about the Jewish community in the town. So something like completely against the Jewish also law and traditions to reuse a tombstone. But here they are, and it was like a little area that I would say wasn't bigger than 6% of the historical area of the whole cemetery. But it was there, and I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that in the dark of the night, this huge monument was stolen. It was just removed from the cemetery, and nobody knew why. And all of a sudden, we started to find out that this little plot of land, which belonged to the state and has been in the process of being given back to the Jewish community, in the meanwhile has been rented out to a developer who wanted to build a new wing of the shopping center exactly in that spot. So definitely a little corruption went on there, but this is not exactly important. What is important that this town is the birthplace of Ben Gurion. So the founder of Israel and the first prime minister of Israel, kind of a scandal, especially that this is the town in this region in central Poland that besides Warsaw and a few other places, Israeli trips go, because there is this like a little rock in the center of town commemorating Ben Gurion. There is still the house standing where he lived. Also, definitely because of this cooperation, even economic relations were built between this town and Israeli businessmen. So a little scandalous if you have delegations going to this little memorial in the town square, and when you actually approach the cemetery, it looks something like this. It's just, it practically doesn't exist. And this is the moment that the ministers, the Polish ministers involved in the previous negotiations that didn't work out, they started doing something, and they said, okay, we have to act, because first, a theft, second of all, like very, very illegal procedures within the Polish law, and third of all, really like very bad PR for Poland, for Polish-Jewish relations, which despite whatever we can say about government or the narratives, they are trying to build up this, whether it's a facade or the real thing, that the Polish-Jewish relations are good. So first time we were invited to the Senate, and this is like the beginning of the procedure to do something about it. And this was the Rabbinical Commission, the representative of the Jewish community in Warsaw, because also this land is very close to Warsaw. The Polin Museum, there is a foundation for Jewish heritage which is responsible for the restitution of Jewish cemeteries in Poland. And we sat down with other official representatives and started talking. And the talking, how should I say this? For us, what was important? For us, the most important thing was to acknowledge that the cemetery is first of all larger than this little symbolic area. For us, it was important to acknowledge historical boundaries. So yes, even if we will have a situation where we have every possible thing standing in the cemetery, that there will be a kind of a solution on what to do if we all know that human remains are there. So even putting in a new pipe, there is a solution that people know who to call, how to deal with the human remains found during even this work. This was our aim. This was our aim, so that finally Jewish cemeteries in Poland will stop being acknowledged as the symbolic memorial spaces, but will be acknowledged as the Jewish cemeteries which are still there. And the first step was of course to create a registry, because I gave you that beautiful number 1200, but this is a guest number until recently. We thought it's 1100, maybe 1300, 1400, because nobody knows, like nobody ever created a registry. My institute in the 1990s got up to the number of 990, I think. And then along with the Polish museum, with the Jewish museum in Warsaw, the Polin Museum, we added on 200 extra, but we still know during our fieldwork that there must be more, because we just have more testimonies coming in and so on. So first of all, we have to create a registry, but we have to create a registry which will give us the owner. Even if you will contact Jewish communities, there are 9 Jewish communities in Poland, and you will ask them, is this your cemetery? They will say, we'll just have to check on this. We'll get back to you in a few months. Because nobody knows. This is how difficult it is, because one cemetery, few different plots of land, a few different parcels of land belonging to different people. So this was how many cemeteries, the historical boundaries, maps of cemeteries in 1939, and who is the owner. And I can say that this registry is happening and it's going along pretty well, but this is the only thing that is going along pretty well. I spent 2 years going to these meetings. Each of them took many, many hours, and you have to understand that the hardest part was explaining the shift. You do not use the word former Jewish cemetery. We're talking about Jewish cemeteries. There is no word former. If you do not leave that one word out of this equation, that we have nothing to talk about, because again, no one will acknowledge a former Jewish cemetery as protection, because many people say all of Poland is a cemetery for the different historical events. And these negotiations were also very, very difficult, because there was a great difference for us in protection, as in physical, actual protection of these sites, which we would imagine there would be a legislation for it. You know, you write documents and you even force them on people so they know what to do, and a symbolic protection. And it very quickly turned out that I was speaking for 3 hours and saying and explaining the exact concept of a Jewish cemetery and its historical borders, and to, if not fence them, because this is impossible, then at least to put it on a map, because this is the first step to protecting something. And I was getting an answer back, yes, of course, we just have to find a GPS point and pinpoint it. I said, big difference, 3 hectares, 2 hectares, different parcels and pinpointing. This is not protection. And after many months of these kinds of talks, it was almost like over when the representatives of the Rabbinical Commission said, we are not talking to you anymore if you do not stop using the word former. It has to be without it. If you can use the word even historical, because these are the historical boundaries, but not former. We got to a point where there was supposed to be a competition for different designers dealing with Jewish topics in Poland. They're either of Jewish descent or Poles, but they do know the field. They do have that sensitivity of what should be acknowledged and to choose the best way. So this project was supposed to have a commemoration stone or some kind of a marking that will say that this site is protected by the state, and it was supposed to take care of the issue of the borders. But in the meanwhile, all that was successful and that we were able to achieve was sending out by the ministry this set of rules for all the landmark preservation offices, the set of rules which the Rabbinical Commission uses. So this is a set of rules how to clean the cemetery, how to deal with tombstones. It says that you cannot go into the ground, meaning that even when you clean the cemetery, like you cut out bushes, you cannot pull out a weed because the weed might be deep in the ground and you might endanger the remains within the ground. So this kind of thing went out along with a plead from the ministry. All the landmark preservation offices, which are in every single voivodeship, there are 16 in Poland, and they have their regional offices, they are in their own capacity to finally start documenting these Jewish cemeteries and send the information to the capital, to Warsaw, to us. And it turned out that this was completely like misunderstood, that if you live in a town, you work in a town, you can actually go and do field research. You can go and talk to people and ask, hello, do you remember if there is a Jewish cemetery there? You can take photographs, you can research your own archives. And there is this kind of a dependency on the capital and what comes from the above, from the higher powers, that actually all the questions about Jewish cemeteries from different regions came back to my institute and to me, like, can you give us the information about everything? It's like, it's impossible to even acknowledge that you have exactly that site under your foot, that you cross it every day going to work. So this also took months to explain, like, to make the public officers aware that this is on your terrain, this is sort of your local heritage. You don't have to go back to Warsaw to find out something which is there, which is yours. And all in all, this sending out this plea, it did bring information in. There is the National Institute for Heritage, which is doing right now this inventory, and we are getting close to the estimated number of 1,200. If this is done, I will say it's an amazing improvement. If they have access to all kinds of maps, whether it's even army maps and so on, so they can put all the parcels of land onto one another and create something beautiful. I don't know if this will happen. So far we have a list. A list is good as well because we didn't have a list. But moving on, this competition which was supposed to happen, well, I actually didn't hear from them for about a year, until 3 days before coming here. I had a phone call that there is to be the grand meeting and the summary of the whole project. The project that I've been working on for 2 years, but there is going to be a summary of it. So they invited all of the institutions, and we found out that there was just simply a change in the persons doing it from the ministry side, and that definitely the Jewish community in Warsaw is acknowledged as a consultant, but this is what they came up with. We're sitting in a room of 15 people. Half of them are representatives of the government, of the ministry, of the state institutions, and we are finding out that it will be like a pilot project, that 6 cemeteries will be chosen to be commemorated with this kind of a little, like a plug this big, which will be either put on a gate or a wall or a stone, just to like make you realize that we're dealing with sort of general knowledge about how bad it is in the field, how bad things are, that these cemeteries are being destroyed. We are actually taking this little plug and we're looking at it from this point, but is it made from the right material so that it won't be destroyed? Like, you know, metal will be taken for scrap metal. So even on this level, we're sort of knowing that it's impossible to make it last if it's not done in the right way. But 6 of this will be placed in 6 different cemeteries. There will be a commemoration. There will be a fine which will be placed for destroying, and this is interesting, for not destroying the cemetery, but for destroying this particular plug, because it's sort of been put there by the state. And you see what it says here. Here in this place there is a Jewish cemetery, and the information about the boundaries and its history can be found. And this, it's not inserted yet, but you know how you have those QR codes that you like move your cell phone and you can have it open, so it will open to the governmental website, where you will find that the government is looking after the Jewish cemeteries. You will have the historical boundaries and the information. I don't know how you feel about it, but for me still it's a symbolic protection. It's just like it's not actually giving us, the people working with this, tools to protect this site if something bad happens, right? So again, this prevention that we were looking for. And of course, you know, questions like whether this will open for everyone. Does everyone have internet? Like even foreigners coming in, they do not have internet here. Is this enough? And questions are, why only 6 cemeteries? It's expensive. We only have money for that. Will it be continued? Hopefully. What cemeteries are chosen? Oh, the ones that are not too difficult right now to deal with, to even place this commemoration in this spot. So looking at all of this, I don't know if I was optimistic in that meeting, but I could see that these people have a kind of a will to do something. But it did seem strange that exactly in the time that like 15 officials are sitting in that one room, we are finding out the next day that a sports field has been just opened with a beautiful ceremony in southern Poland, exactly on the land of the Jewish cemetery, and the funds came from the state. So you can like sort of see the dissonance here in our actions and what is being done. A lot is being done, and it is done mainly, I will still say, because there are so many good individuals living in Polish towns who are trying to do something, but it's all very relative. Will this last? I have sat down to write the doctorate exactly in May, and since then I have counted 6 devastations of Jewish cemeteries. This is a lot, because in the previous years of my work I have never counted so many happening in 1 year, in a few months. And this is of course very much connected with politics, with what is happening in Poland, that, you know, the right wing is coming to power. So in conclusion, Again, ending maybe with myself, but my idealism is still there, but it is very shaky right now. And we're still looking for a solution because we are a team of people working together for so many years. But you know, if you ever have any ideas, I'd be happy to listen to them because all input is always needed. Thank you. Do you have any questions, maybe?
Chief Rabbi of Poland, you mentioned his name, Michael Sudrich. He was in Vancouver last year, roughly a year ago, maybe more, maybe less. I didn't go to his talk. The next morning, I heard a story of how a new cemetery came into being in Poland in the last couple of years. This guy goes into his office, I think he's in Warsaw, and he says, I grew up in a small town, and there's a rumor that a lot of Jews were in the woods, and they were hiding from the Nazis. The Nazi found them, there were about 20 or 30, executed them all, and where they fell, they lay. And this is 40, 50, 60 years. So Sudrich gets several people together, him and the other fellow, and says, let's go find out, let's go have a look. It's a rumor in town, they go there and they find all these skeletons, because the animals probably ate them, and you know, they were looting and all that. So they were to be buried where they were found on that spot, which meant that, you know, graves were made and you have to say prayers, but many of them, they did not know names, there was not identification. The looters would take clothes or things because they were valuable. So they were buried, a little fence, like you mentioned, was made, the prayers were made, and that became a cemetery. They were buried where they were found in a little isolated spot in the middle of the woods, not many people around, and that's a new cemetery. He also says a lot of his time has to be spent in dealing with government departments. You mentioned a sports field, and somebody wants to make a transmission tower, and somebody wants to have infrastructure or a private development, and to get permits, he finds out about it, and then he has to go and try and get the permits canceled. And very often you're building a big road, and it's the cemetery. What do? You go around, there's a river here, there's something here. It's hard to go around. Maybe you can go over it. There has to be a solution, but it's a full time because so much new infrastructure, new roads, new transmission towers you mentioned shopping centers, developments, they want to be built, and very often the cemetery is right in the path of urban growth. And it's hard. You know, he has to use his influence, and he's got good connections, and the government, and he does his best, and usually solutions are found.
I work with Rabbi Sudrich on a daily basis, and the thing is that the solutions are found for one cemetery. It takes months to find these solutions, and this is the Rabbinical Commission. Exactly, these are the people working for him to find this solution. They're trying to even invent new methods, like new methodology to, first of all, you said roads are being built. Yes, they do try to come up with solutions of, for example, building 2 meters over the cemetery so it doesn't touch the ground. But you're saying solutions can be found. This is exactly that. They dug the shovel in, they found the remains. It's all over the place. Then the rabbi is called, the Rabbinical Commission is called, and they have to come up with the solution. And because there are good people in Poland, there are like archaeologists who want to help. There are investors who even invest more money. Like there was a very famous example of them wanting to, I think, rebuild a fire station, and they actually moved the whole foundations. They built the foundations around the graves under the building, and I think 20 people were working on that, the Rabbinical Commission and Michael Sudrich as well. Yeah. But this is, you see, this is tons of money. This is after, you know, that shovel goes into the ground.
And after the permit is issued.
And after the permit is issued, this is the one thing. The other thing that you said about this being a new Jewish cemetery is no. We have there's a status of a Jewish cemetery, and this is what we count Jewish cemetery that belonged to the Jewish community in 1939, and we close this here. What you are talking about, we call this Jewish war graves.
Okay.
Because this is another thing that I am working on. I've actually researched exactly in a way that you are saying. I think I researched like 4 provinces in Poland like
Yeah.
this, and we go into the field, we talk to people,
Yeah.
they tell us they are the last witnesses, they tell us there are bodies here, and this is the first step, locating, putting it on the map. This is what my institute is doing as well.
Yes.
Then going into the archives looking for the identity, because sometimes even if you don't have the surname or anything, sometimes you just have that one word. He whose name was Moshe and he was a tailor, and it took us months to find that information, and we find out that there was like a young woman, an older woman and a child, and we put all of that. I write these texts actually.
Yes.
And you put every single thing about that person you can find onto that memorial or a tombstone in the forest, in the meadows, and exactly what you said, they are not taken from that space, they are to be buried exactly there, because if we take all the graves out of that countryside,
Yes.
nothing will be left and nobody will ever remember.
Yes.
And also, where do we move them? We don't have that many cemeteries with open space.
No, but I mean, you mentioned that right where they were found, they were killed, shot,
Yes.
and that's the exact spot.
That's the exact, yes, or
But they were
even
buried in a nice fence, like you mentioned, was
Yes.
built, and they had
To-
all the
to mark the borders
to
of
mark
the,
the
of
borders,
the,
and
yes.
they had all the
Yes.
writing and the prayers and everything. And he said, if someone didn't take it upon themselves to come and see me from that village and say, I heard a rumor, and I went out there and I looked and I saw these bodies all these years, no one took it upon themselves to mention to anybody, the government or Jewish
Mhm.
organizations, I'm doing it, they wouldn't have known.
That's another thing that's important. When we have these signals that there is a grave, besides us doing this big project, which was a project, we wanted to go and look. All the other cases, like really all the other cases, it is the people contacting us and saying, listen, I remember that there is a grave here, do you want to do something about it? Or listen, they want to build something in the forest and there should be a grave. And these are Polish people who call, who write to us. Sometimes they're scared, sometimes they write anonymously, like they send a letter in handwriting and they don't sign the name because they're scared that something bad will happen, but they do write it and we go and check that information and it turns out that it's all accurate.
Yes.
So this is a great input from entities from these local communities. The
Yes.
same with cemeteries, they usually like call us, I can't look at this, there is a new dump site in the cemetery, can you do something about it? And that's the thing, we say, no, we can't, you have to go and clean it, or you have to get other people to go
Yeah.
and clean it with you.
The thing is, he has to be told that people are applying for a permit, plans have been made, architects have been
Yeah,
hired,
yeah,
buildings are
exactly.
gonna go up. He said, we've only found out now until someone told us. Now I have to try and reverse everything, I have to
Yes.
try, and if someone has spent a lot of money for, say, architects or permits, they says, I don't wanna lose it, I mean, I didn't know it's a cemetery, the government didn't tell me, the city hall didn't tell
Oh,
me.
it's like in
What
the-
do we do now? And they have to come up with some kind of
Yeah.
compromise, some kind of solution,
Or-
they depend on the goodwill.
A person even buys a plot of land with a house and they find out there is a cemetery there. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you do with that house? You don't want to live there, you can't sell it. And
Yeah.
it's because of the division of the parcels. It's the same with the Płońsk, like that. It's a company called City Star that's building that new wing. They're still in court. They don't want to let go because they already paid for it.
Yeah.
Like what do they really care? The
Yeah.
cemeteries all over the place, and we're just being bureaucratic about that one symbolic plot of land.
Yeah. One of their legal arguments is we have all the permits they wish to us.
Yes, because
We-
they do
we've argued
because
in
they
good
do have
faith,
all the permits. Yes.
And we have it, and now you wanna take it away, are you able to take away? You have the right to take away.
That's why we want the legislation, the official something
Yeah.
to protect
One
it.
of the issues is that the Jewish population in Poland is going down, it's shrinking.
I don't know if it's shrinking. I don't think it's just out of the closet completely.
How about the Polish register? Aren't the Jewish cemetery in the Polish registry somewhere?
No.
The shtetls and, no?
No, it's like, for example, what happened during the communist years, that very often in local archives, or you have the geodetic maps, Jewish cemeteries, when a new map was made, they were just simply erased from the maps. And also, you have to remember that all the documents, 1939, okay, why we had to inventory a cemetery like Warsaw Cemetery, 200,000 burials, not a single document, all was burned, all was destroyed. So you go into most of the towns and you just do not have a single piece of paper that says this belonged to the Jewish to the Jewish community. Nothing, like nothing. It's sometimes in the maps that you have a pre-war map, you have a Jewish cemetery marked here, or a testimony, or just simply tombstones standing. But also many of these documents just simply have not been discovered because they're in closed archives. I mean, the communist years have also, they enabled any search in certain archives, right? So nothing. It all has to be recreated. That's why, for example, we are working on the methodology, and we are using even, you know, that there are tons and tons of photographs which are now in the archives of in Scotland and also in Washington in United States of aerial photography. And the Germans, they flew over all of Poland practically, and they documented 1939, 40, and then like let's say 43. So we can take these documents, and you can sometimes see whole cemeteries. They're very specific aerial documents. We have specialists now at the Warsaw Polytechnics working with us and reading these, and this also goes for Jewish war graves, because you can see the light hitting the soil which has been dug through, and you can see like in the middle of a field that there is a change, and we have a testimony. So someone said somewhere there, you have circa a map, you have an aerial photograph, then you have the georadar which reads like magnetic waves in the soil, very inaccurate, but it is able to tell us has someone dug through it. We also, the Rabbinical Commission is very controversial, but they also use these like wands that also show these like magnetic changes, and they're also very accurate. But this is this methodology that I'm talking about. This is the last like 10 years that we've been working on this. Each one of us like adds another little something to this equation, because we're like starting from scratch. There is nothing. How to research this if there is nothing? It's like sort of magic studies, because you can never actually go into the ground to check if there is anything there, because it's forbidden.
I have something to ask you that you probably know. A huge cemetery on Brudna.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on there?
Oh,
There is a beautiful.
Okay, I have a picture of that cemetery here that this is the cemetery. So you the other Jewish cemetery in Warsaw, yes? That's the Brudno.
Brudno.
Yes. So what's happening there? The tombstones, as you see, they're lying as they are lying there, are still there, but there has been a great change, because again, this cemetery was much larger. In the 1980s, it was fenced by a very famous foundation, the Nissenbaum Foundation, who worked in Poland. And they fenced it, and they erected a very monumental gate, but the rest was left in neglect. Only a few tombstones were sort of re-erected to pretend that this is a cemetery, and the rest is like this. And actually, when I told you I have the foundation with the two colleagues, one of the two colleagues, after he came back from a misfortunate experience of trying to make Aliyah and it didn't work out in Israel as he planned, he came back and he wanted to work in cemeteries, right? What he's going to do. And we actually wrote a nomination for him, and he's the director of that cemetery now. And they established an educational center. And inside, in a little building, we all created a very small but first exhibition about Jewish cemeteries in Poland and about this particular cemetery. and we wrote the text, and we found the archival documents and so on, all the history of the Jewish cemetery. And he's trying to do something there. He's trying to protect it. He's trying to work with the local community, which it's like on the other side of the river. So this part of Warsaw is not considered like a wealthy part, and there are a lot of like drinking problems and so and so. So also this cemetery is a place where people go through and drink, and not like a very welcoming area, but they're trying to work with these people and telling them like, hello, this is a cemetery. They try to go to schools.
Is the gate still there?
The gate is still there. They fixed the fence because the fence also had a few pieces missing because people just stole it for scrap metal. And this is an interesting thing, because they were trying to do something with the tombstones, because we want to inventory them, because this is like 6,000 tombstones. It's a missing link for genealogy research. Tombstone means genealogy. You have all the family information, and out of the whole region, because we already done like 100 cemeteries, but this is the only one we can't do, because how you gonna lift that tombstone to get all the inscriptions? And there was an idea to create, there were many ideas, but we rejected many of them, to create an educational path in the cemetery. No. But they found an aerial map of the cemetery where you can see the alleys, the lanes between different sections. So we know definitely from this where there are burials and where there are none. So just in case anyone might need to be buried there, or any projects, or even sightseeing, we know which way to go. So this is a great development, but right now it's just the exhibition. It's guarded. The Jewish community of Warsaw is paying for my colleague to be the director there. He also has 2 more colleagues working with him. They're really good people, it's like in the right hands, and they know tons of stuff about Jewish cemeteries. And they also guide there, and in Polish, in Hebrew, and in English. So it's like the Jewish community is really trying to take care of this. Although the surrounding area, because there is a roundabout and streets, this is still a cemetery. And the Jewish community, I think, a few years back applied, could they get back that area, but no, this is like infrastructure, everything has been done there. So also this Brudno cemetery, it used to be much larger. It was destroyed by the Germans, but it was later on destroyed after the war. And there was this very big thing that there is a zoo in Warsaw, right? So they found pieces of tombstones in the pavements, and like little elements in the landscape. It was made from exactly these tombstones from the Brudno cemetery. So probably the idea was that they started using them for different purposes. Like even there is a park that has a pavement in Warsaw made out of this, out of these tombstones. But maybe there was just too much stone. Maybe nobody needed it. But there was also an idea to turn this cemetery into an official park due to that legislation from the 1950s. So 1950s, they were preparing to turn it into the park. That's why you have the trees, the pretty trees there, that it's the same kind, because it would look good in a park.
I have another question.
The Russian, when I was coming 1945, well, because my family was lived in this area, was very big battle, was lots of shooting, was destroyed from the Russian Katyusha, the bomb,
Yeah.
This was exactly what I heard from the very long time ago.
What are with the symbolic graves there in Warsaw?
It's worth mentioning, though. I was in Poland 2 years ago, and a lot of work was done in many of the cemeteries that we visited, especially in the big one in Warsaw, and Krakow.
The they're the best ones.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, they take you always to visit the best ones, not this kind of stuff. But a lot has been done, and it looks really nice. There are a lot of people, many religious people,
Yes.
like Orthodox, who
Yes.
come in there in large groups. And,
Because there are a lot of tzaddiks buried there, so yes.
well, yeah, many of their famous leaders are buried there.
Yes. Yes.
So these are holy places for them.
And they're actually giving money for the renovation of these of the tombstones and the ochels. So this is very positive. That it's like, again, it's not a situation where why aren't you doing anything, or why aren't you doing anything. They're contributing to this greatly because they really care. And getting back to your question, if I understood correctly, the symbolic graves in Warsaw Cemetery, are they there? Because they are there. You know they are there, right?
We were the second one, I think, that we put one. Now it's different a little.
Yes, there are a lot of symbolic graves, and I think this started mainly in the 80s, that also money was sent in, and these symbolic graves were there to commemorate
But
families.
where are the people who put those graves? It has to be some people who put those graves, from family who came all over the world.
But are you asking where are the families, or where are the workers who actually did this?
Yeah.
The second one?
I don't, yes, about the people who put those.
Well,
Forgot about it?
They didn't forget about it. These people are no longer working at the Jewish cemetery because they were fired, or they have passed away.
Private people put that.
Yes, but you're talking about the workers who are giving the order to make a symbolic grave. Yes. So these people, because it was quite a few years ago, they are no longer the directors of the Jewish cemetery. The Jewish cemetery in Warsaw had one director who was put there after the war, and he was there for 40 years, and then his son took over. But due to a few things, he was the father died when the son took over. He was actually fired after a few years, and now there is like a new people taking care of these symbolic graves. But for example, when we were doing the inventory of the cemetery, we definitely did write the names of the symbolic graves. I mean the persons from the symbolic graves, but they were usually done. The symbolic graves were done in an area which is the middle of the cemetery, and used to be also burial sites, or they were added. They added another commemoration plaque to a tombstone.
I can show you how they looked. Do you know?
I think I should. I spent a third of my life there. Yes, so I can.
Maybe finish with others.
Okay, I'll finish with others. Do others have any questions?
You said the father passed away and the son took over, and the son was fired because of a few reasons. What are these reasons? Financial?
No, it was a lot of controversies in the way that he was running the cemetery. So
Not that the financial.
no, not financial. No.
There was a cemetery person here who was fired because he was selling the same plot to different people.
So you know, like
His name was
you know
Feldstein.
what can go on in a cemetery.
He
What am
was
I
selling
going to
the
tell you?
same plot. His father was the head. His name was Hartley Feldstein. It's no big thing. Everybody knows that. I'm not giving confidential information. He was fired because some people come and they said, "What? This is 10 years ago. Somebody else was buried here. Yeah, I've got a receipt." They had a receipt. He decided to go to Portland.
So in Warsaw, a lot of controversies, maybe not like this, but very similar. But officially, he was fired for quite a funny reason. There was just marijuana growing there, which is legal in Poland, and there was a field of it in one section. And because it's so illegal and it's on a land owned by a Jewish community, it leaked out to the press that it's growing there, and the board of the Jewish community just used this pretext to fire him, but this was not absolutely the reason, because he was definitely not selling pot. Definitely not that. But now there is a new director, there are new people taking care of this.
Because he would not have wanted to make changes that his father did. They would not look good on his father if he wanted to make changes. He said, my father did this, then I'll do that. I'm not going to disrespect my father and make changes, so it was good enough for the father.
Continuing the tradition, right?
Yeah, he did. So
Okay,
maybe it
Jack,
was
Jack,
part.
he won a good reason, he was drinking too much.
Oh, really? Okay.
Then that's okay, that's a good reason.
Now, the synagogues in Warsaw, the few synagogues in Poland are usually full of Jews. And one of the reasons they're so full on a Saturday morning is that people come to the free meal.
I went to cemetery in Krakow.
I never heard that.
No,
No. I've never
people
heard
come
that.
for the free meal.
I never heard of a synagogue giving a free meal. Otherwise, I would have been there. But no, it's no. I don't think so. There
I'm
was
only joking.
No, I'm only joking as well. But I think there was a great difficulty for many years of getting a minyan together, and
Yeah.
right now it's not a problem, especially in Warsaw and Kraków. But mainly Warsaw, it's okay.
Okay.
There's some big, beautiful synagogues there, but I don't know what happens during services, if people come or not.
Yes, they come. We have like an Orthodox, we have a Reform. Many Israelis live in Warsaw right now, so they also, like the ones who are religious, they go and pray. So there is a community there.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting talk. I really like listening to you. I want to know if it's hard to generalize, but I might ask you to generalize and give me your opinion. If you were to ask each community in Poland, how do you feel about having a small cemetery? How do you feel about having a commemorative plaque or stone representation? Not including like developers who want to develop and people who have financial gain or may want to profit. More of an ethical values from that perspective. How do you feel most Polish people would feel about having that in their community?
Most Polish people do have that in their community, and I wouldn't say that it's an unwanted heritage. It's not unwanted. It's just such difficult history, and it's loss of memory. Sometimes it's deliberate loss of memory, but you do have to remember that we have started, the whole Jewish topic practically 40-50 years after the war. There was no place for talking. There was no time for talking. So this is something which has been very badly dealt with, and starting to talk about some issues so many years later, right? It's just somehow impossible. It's sometimes exhausting, because how much more, it's not even of the Jewish, how much more of the Second World War can you take? I mean, it's been so many years. But I wouldn't say that people don't, for example, don't completely respect these sites. There is always, the kind in the community that goes and drinks in places which are nobodies. And the Jewish cemetery is perceived, it's like no man's land. Nobody goes there. There is no law. If it belongs to no one, then we can do anything there. It's also somehow connected. I don't think it's connected that much always with a Polish-Jewish issue. I think it's connected with somehow with the Polish issue, like how we, for example, take the garbage into the forest and just leave it there. And so the Jewish cemetery is a forest, so why not? It's not always about the Polish Jewish, if we want or don't want the Jewish. It's just like, it's nobody's, it's misunderstood. But many of the cemeteries that have been somehow commemorated, and they do have tombstones, many of them are standing, but yes, again, you will have certain people who will, like there is even a cemetery which is like a place for prostitution, okay? So this is a cemetery, and everyone knows that everyone goes there and does it. And this is one town. Another town, it's like homeless people sleep there. Another cemetery, this is where you graze your chickens and your cows. And it's not that the whole community does it, but there is like this kind of a permission for treating a place which is no one's. And I think it's something to do with, I don't like to use the word mentality because it's a very strong word, but with culture and with the history, with even the communism of how public and private space was treated. There were so little things which were private. And this is something that also has to be, I think, researched, and even researched for the purposes of how to plan towns in Poland, or how to make people aware that this is yours, you take care of it. If you keep it clean, then you have it clean, right? So I think it's a bit of a bigger issue than just, you know, if a Jewish cemetery is wanted or unwanted, because if something is put there, it usually these days it stands. I don't know if it's not going to change, because the situation is dynamic. So we'll see.
So yeah, understandably, Poland has gone through so much history, and especially with the communism and everything. I'm really wondering, so the younger people of today's Poland, do they have is there Jewish education in Polish schools? Are they being exposed to Jewish history? You know, that Poland is much more than just Catholic Poland. You know, that kind of sense. Like, there's so much layers of history. Is it taught in Polish schools?
It's, I think that throughout the whole educational system, and all the time you are in school, the Jewish topic will arise a few times, too little at times. It will be usually connected to the Holocaust, that you will have some literature and you will have a lesson or two in history. By the way, just like this year, again, they changed the educational system, and the text and the content is horrific. Like it's you know, men and women in their places, the God is everywhere, and Poland is great again. It's horrible, so it's changing. But I can tell you how I had it. I had one class about the Holocaust, and I think something was mentioned about the Jews from like maybe the Middle Ages, something like this, that they were there, and they like hardly anything. But on the other hand, the Polish schools welcome additional initiatives from teachers. And this is why when I say in every town there is a positive person, these persons are usually teachers, and they try to have additional classes, for example, about local Jewish culture, but it depends on the school. Like sometimes it's one teacher and the whole school is against it, and sometimes it's half a school working together, and sometimes it's 3 lady teachers wanting to do something, but they will also be the ones taking the youth into the cemetery and cleaning it, for example. But it's like it is additional, or starting in some kind of a national competition about Jews. My institute, for example, has this kind of a competition for years, that you win prizes if you send a story about local Jews in your town. And actually, a colleague of mine that I work with, even right now, she applied when she was like, I think 12 years old, and she was so disappointed because my institute had no money and gave her a story about birds or something, and she wanted, you know, if she's doing the Jewish, let her give her a book about Jewish at least. But we were just starting then. But this we do this non-stop, and it's actually great because kids from every town, like we I think every year we got 100 and something entries, so 100 and something kids from different schools go and research the history of Jews in their local town. And it's great because they take photographs and they send it to us, and they talk to their grandparents, and they try to get this kind of a thing, but it's also always additional. And we also, like my institute, for example, has programs for educating teachers in how to teach about Jews. But this is something that they apply for on their own. This is their own time, and they can come back to the school, and if the headmaster allows it, then they can teach it in, for example, additional like local historical class or something. So that's it's not too great. But of course, there is the narrative that we were the multicultural everything, and
If according to Jewish law you can't really upset a grave by like removing weeds, you gave the example. So how do you maintain it if you're not allowed to remove those kinds of things and clear?
cutters and lawnmowers, because they don't go into the ground. They also use Roundup, just to spray the. But this
I
is.
see, okay.
This is the way. This is the way. You just go in and you clean, and no rakes are allowed just to get the leaves, but like a shovel is not a tool you even allow for these kinds of works. Just not to give anyone an idea.
Is there anybody overseeing it to make sure that it's being done according to how?
If
Like how.
If you go into a cemetery and you want to do something, you should first contact the owner. So very often people, because they don't know who the owner is, then they go sort of through us. And then we say, look for the owner, or I'll help you find the owner. And then, but remember you have to do it in this and this way. So it's sort of it's their goodwill that they contact you about it, but I haven't really heard of just someone going and doing and not telling absolutely anyone about it. There is a very good association dealing with not just Jewish cemeteries but like Orthodox or Protestant, and they renovate the tombstones. And they, a few times when they were doing this, they actually in Jewish cemetery, they pulled the stone way too deep out of the ground. And I think that very quickly they even sent the results of their work, and the chief rabbi and the Rabbinical Commission looked at it and said, that's not the way we do it, so please do it the right way next time. So the word gets around because they have to contact someone, and usually either goes through us, the Rabbinical Commission, the Jewish communities. Like there are just a few phone numbers or a few emails out there to contact, or of course the Pauline Museum, the New Jewish Museum in Warsaw. They also know how to do it, and they have their people.
Yeah, I've been through the New Jewish Museum in Warsaw, and it is powerful.
The big one.
Yes.
You should come and visit our little one. It's also powerful.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah, I was there in June.
Yeah?
Yes.
In our institute?
Yes. Yeah.
Did you
It's
like
probably more powerful than the big museum.
because we have the original stuff.
It is.
So you're very welcome next time you come.
I actually have film.
Oh, this is about our institute and about our exhibition. If you'd like to take it, and like the whole idea of the archives.
And also Polish consulate sent some books about the Jewish heritage in Poland. So please help yourself.
Could you give me one more?
That's about the preservation of Jewish heritage in Poland. So those are for you to take.
It's really cool. So we can take them.
Yeah, you can take them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.